Kat. This is Kat Leyh. We have a conversation about comics, about your inspiration. My name is Jakob Hoffmann, and normally I sit here together with Michael Ross, a comic artist from Berlin. But now, today, we're here in Frankfurt, and Michael can't make it to come here, but he gives you all the regards that we wish. And together we do the comic video podcast Comic Sans, which is a crazy name, but we're very happy to talk with comic artists about their work and their inspiration. Kat, the reason why you're here is this book, Snapdragon. Maybe we just start. Tell us something about this book. It is published now in Germany. It's nominated for the Deutsche Jugendliteraturpreis, and it's most of all a gorgeous story.
Thank you. Snapdragon is a story about a young girl who confronts her town's local witch, and she ends up forming an unlikely friendship with her and learning a little bit about her work, which involves roadkill, and learns a little bit about magic along the way, and also her own family's history.
Mm-hmm. And it's finished, I guess, 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
This came out in English in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I finished it a while before that, so it's been quite a few years since I worked on it.
So we're happy that you introduce it now in the German market, and that you get this nomination, which is really cool.
Yeah,
and
it's exciting.
It's also exciting that more and more comics get nominated for these classical literature prizes. I don't know if it's the same in the United States, but
yeah, it's not very common for comics to be nominated for literature awards.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a pretty strong division in a lot of people's minds between prose and visual media.
Mm-hmm.
But that changes every once in a while.
You already talked about that Snapdragon is about roadkill, and when we read this story, we quickly see that it's take place on the countryside.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can connect that to a little look back to your biographical roots. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where did you grow up? Has it and is there any connection to that scenery?
Yeah, I moved around a lot when I was a kid, but for the most part, I lived in the Midwest in America, and I also we always lived someplace rural, either farm country or in the woods, and I spent a lot of my childhood outside in nature, exploring and digging through the dirt and all that kind of stuff. So it's Snap's interests are based off of some of my interests when I was her age.
And now you're living in Chicago. Do you miss the countryside? Do you ever consider to move back?
I do miss it. I volunteer with the forest preserves in Chicago so that I get to spend some time in nature and in the woods and digging around in the dirt. But I also really appreciate all the advantages that come from living in the city, being able to go to concerts and have more than one grocery store and have Asian grocery stores and just more people, more community.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to visit the country a lot, but we're probably going to stay in the city.
Okay. Because we've got a quite strong notion about the Midwest in Europe or in Germany as a very conservative area, and the characters you draw so nicely in this book they are outsiders, more or less. How does that work together? You see, for example, they have really an interesting discourse about gender, about being male or female. This morning we were in a school class and we read a little piece of Snapdragon, and the main character Jax, for example, was considered as male. And it's not. I guess it's not the first time. It's also an issue. It's also
surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are queer people in all of my works. I'm queer myself, and there are also queer people in every corner of the world, in every community. It's true that people get the impression that there are more conservative, closed-minded people in rural settings, but that's not always the case. You're going to get progressive people in the country the same way that you're going to get closed-minded people in the city. And growing up, if you're different in some way, it can be more difficult maybe to find your tribe or your group when there were fewer people around. So that was sort of the experience that Snap has in the book, but also Jax had when she was growing up.
Yeah, especially when it comes to family and these questions, founding a family and and all that stuff. But it's not a as I read it, it's not a graphic novel about rednecks or about the bad countryside or the super conservative countryside. It also offers a lot of opportunities for when it comes to roadkills and to animals, for example.
Yeah. I like to focus on aspects of the countryside that I'm familiar with, which is generally a pretty accepting family and friends that are like me. But then obviously the other thing that Snap and Jax share is an interest in dead animals and living animals. But that's just kind of another layer to their characters that make them feel sort of othered and different.
And they're also interested in ghosts and in motorbiking ghosts and
Yep, motorcycles come into it later as well as ghosts.
Yeah. If you want to talk about Snapdragon and, for example, somebody asked you what is this about, there is a lot to say. It's also about the working conditions of a single mother, for example. It's also about the queer community and also about bullying in the school and stuff like that. Does it come naturally to bring all that stuff into the story, or was it all scripted because you say you got the need to say that and bring it in?
The bully characters in the story, those serve a purpose. They're kind of a shorthand to show how Snap feels alone. There were other ways I could have done that, but the bullying stereotypes are well known, and I leaned on those for the story. And in a similar way, I wanted Snap's mother, as a single mother, doing a lot of working and being low income, to also be not this negative aspect to the story, just to show that all the stereotypes that we have about low income people, there's a lot of diversity in those groups as well. They're not all these they're tragic characters. So yeah, I tried to play with stereotypes and subvert a few as well. That was sort of a goal of the story.
But it's also a question that comes to the writing process. Do you do it first, or is it something you start with the characters, or what is your way of working?
I always start with characters. All of my original works are very character driven. So the conflicts tend to come from not these grand conflicts. For Snapdragon specifically, I did start with 2 characters, Jax and Snapdragon, before they had names. They were just a creepy old woman in the woods with a little sort of tomboy apprentice. Those were the first images that I had of the characters. And as far as writing goes, I don't ever write scripts for my own stories. I did try to do that once, and it just felt way harder than how I usually write is by drawing. So I'll start sketching, and I'll usually have a few very clear scenes in my head that I'll start with, drawing them out, and then I go from there. I decide what the story needs, I figure out the pacing of the story.
Yeah, that's important.
And yeah, I work on that with the art and the story simultaneously as I draw.
Because I find that very impressive, the timing and the pace in the story, because it's very, I would say, the temper of Snapdragon is very strong, and it reminds me a little bit of a manga character, very expressive and yelling, and sometimes she needs, especially when it comes to witchcraft, she needs to focus, and it's really an interesting character. And I found the timing so superb that I wonder if there is a long script phase before you start even with drawing, and I'm surprised that you do not, because for example one scene I find very impressive. Maybe is this one scene you got in mind completely, which it's the scene where what's his name, Julian?
Oh,
Lou and Snapdragon swap clothes. And there's so much into it, so much in it in this scene. You see them, she likes his cool shirt, and he said, "Oh, you can have it." And then she offers him some clothes from her mother, and so we know, oh, he likes to be dressed like a woman. Then the mother comes in, and it's all this very good. How should I say, observed scene that she's very tired and do it in a way, and she completely understands the situation, and she really reacted cool. That's a cool mother, I would say. And in the end of these 8 or 9 pages, you establish a wonderful new family constellation in my point of view. Is, for example, this scene, how did that happen? How did you work on that scene? Was it also comes naturally, or?
So I knew that the Lou character was going to be trans at the beginning of the story, so I wanted that scene to occur early enough in the story, kind of see her begin to transition by the end of the story. And as far as pacing goes, it's pretty simple. The last panel on every page, I try to make it ask a question so that you have to turn the page.
A turn picture.
Often it's either someone speaking from off panel, so you turn the page to see what they're saying, or it's sort of a natural cut in the scene, so you want to turn the page and see what happens next. So that's sort of how I go about pacing it, just from a really basic standard. And that also means when you turn the page, it's fun to have a very interesting panel or a big panel showing something exciting happening, like when they're dancing together. So the way that a page is formatted sort of helps with pacing. It helps you figure out how much you can squeeze onto a page. If you can't fit enough stuff onto a page, you know that you need to stretch something out a little longer or just move around the dialogue so that it's paced in a way that reads very naturally, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. But it tells so much. So the scene. It's for itself. It's just joy to see and to watch and to read, and it's got really great details like the pick, the sound of the boy, and this great opening of the closet. The closet is open, whatever that means, and so on and so on. And but in the end, you got the feel, everything is said about this constellation of people, and that's really great. And then we got this connection to the next scene, and see this piece of paper which means something. So
we don't know what's on it.
Yeah.
But it's something significant. It was something that Snap saw, and it really grabbed her attention. So we know that it's important. I show it twice on this page so that you know that it's important and it's gonna get brought up in the next scene.
Yeah.
And things like that sort of help transition and move the story along.
Yeah. It's really great. We mentioned a little bit your background as a kid, that you move around very much. Then you go to, I guess, when you're 19 to Chicago.
For college.
To the college. And in college you already decide to do a focus on the art. So what happened there? Happened then?
Yeah, I decided I wanted to go to an art school, and I chose Columbia College because of how close it was to my family. I didn't want to move to California quite yet. And I moved to Chicago. I had never been to Chicago before I moved there for college, and it was very exciting, and I loved it there. My major was in illustration, but I couldn't decide between illustration and animation. So I also took a lot of animation classes as my elective classes, and I loved them. I've always loved animation. So I really loved those classes.
It's a really different work, isn't it?
Well, you're drawing a lot. You're drawing one character sort of over and over again. Yeah. There are, what I was interested in was storyboarding, which is not too dissimilar from comics. Obviously, all the scenes are the same dimensions in storyboarding, but it's all about deciding what to show and where you put the visual importance and how scenes flow between one and the next. So I learned more about storytelling from my animation classes than I did from my illustration classes.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds logical in a way. Yeah. And was there a certain moment or certain moments where you had something like the certain feeling, I should do comics, some encounters with people, or some lecture of some comic books you admire so much that you think, I must do this too?
Yeah, I didn't really grow up reading comics. We didn't have them at the bookstores that I went to, and there were no comic book shops around, so I would read the cartoon strips in the newspaper, but that's about it. And I never really thought about doing comics until I saw a couple examples of American artists, because I did enjoy reading manga in high school and college.
And they were available there?
I found them to download from the internet.
Mhm.
I did not pay for the first mangas that I read. I did that later. But I really loved manga, but those are Japanese.
Mhm.
And I knew that I wasn't going to move to Japan and become a mangaka. But I still really loved a lot of those comics. And I remember reading a comic by Chris Samnee, one of his Thor comics. And his style was so simple and refreshing, but also just so expressive. And it was different than what I kind of perceived as American comics. And I remember really liking it and thinking like, oh, I could try to do something like that.
So it was a certain approach to the superhero genre, which inspires you so much?
Yeah, it was, I remember the scene because I just saw a couple pages from this comic that I bought later, but it was Thor and he was dressed super casual and sitting on a couch and eating a sandwich and chips, and I think he got like a phone call or something, and he was like, oh, I have to go, and he flew out the window with his hammer, still dressed like pretty casually, and there was something very charming about that scene, and it was a great comic, but it was just there was something about a really domestic scene in a superhero comic that I'd never seen before, and it sort of was I liked it because it was a different way of showing superheroes.
Another inspiration you named when I asked you before is something really different. It's not a superhero, or maybe it's a superheroes avant la lettre, I don't know exactly. It's The Art of Arthur Rackham. I confess I have to check the name again, and then it's the guy from Alice in Wonderland, from the illustration. One of the guys.
One of the two like iconic illustrators of Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. And I ordered 2 poor books, and from the next inspiration we will see. I guess it's print on demand. I'm not sure because it's the editor is Amazon fulfillment, whatever that means, and the quality is not really good, but it's you still see that is amazing stuff. What strikes you about Arthur Rackham?
Arthur Rackham, even in his line art, you can see how extremely expressive his characters are. These characters that are based off of trees are just so uncanny and believable, but he's got such a distinctive style at the same time, and you'll have these juxtaposed characters. A lot of how there's one scene in the beginning of the book where Jax is supposed to be just the absolute scariest that I can make her seem, and a lot of it is just, it's not even based in reality, it's just Snap's impression of her. When Jax is just really trying to be a fairy tale monster, she looks like
it was one of the favorite scenes for the kids this morning. Ooh!
And I like drawing very minimalist, about as minimal as I can. But sometimes you want to just go really detailed and gnarled, and just emphasize every line in the face. And that's something that Arthur Rackham just excels at. And he's got the style like no one else, to the point where some of my other favorite illustrators from the same time period started their careers copying him because his style was so popular that people wanted copycats to make books that looked like his.
Where did you find him? Was it as a kid? Are there books at home with the illustrations of him? Or?
Yeah, I was given a book when I was very little that was a compilation of the golden age of, what was it? It's the golden age of gift book illustration, which is a style of children's book that we don't really have anymore. But they would publish these really big, elaborate, like gilded, beautiful children's books with these huge, just beautiful illustrations, and you could get a lot of work as an illustrator at the time. And Arthur Rackham was one of like the most well known of that era of illustration.
Another influential name is Kai Nielsen. He's from Denmark, I guess.
Yeah.
And I have to check that also and find it in a way familiar. It's for me, it's reminds me a little bit of Art Deco. So a very elaborate style, but also with very interesting colors, choice of colors. What can you say about Kai Nielsen? Why is he important for you, or inspiring, or you like him?
He's another illustrator that has this just extremely recognizable style. He doesn't really look quite like anyone else.
He is like Hokusai at the waves.
Yeah.
But in a way. Okay, sorry.
No. There's a very distinctive illustrative style.
Yeah.
There is an aspect of ukiyo-e printmaking in some of these illustrations because that was very popular also in England and Europe around this time. And Kai Nielsen has this really distinctive stylization where he uses a lot of arches and domes.
Oh, that's
and these
true, yeah.
really just distinctive shapes that are just they're very visually striking. And he also usually has his horizon line really low in the page, and all that combined, it just sort of makes a very unique illustration. And I remember just admiring his work with shapes in his compositions. Yeah, these like just super strong arches and things like that. And he would draw these horses, these ginormous horses.
Yeah, Danish horses.
Yeah.
Scandinavian horses, I would say. Yeah.
But yeah, Arthur Rackham and Kai Nielsen just stood out for me a lot from that book.
Another influencing name beside the Chris Somney and these two guys is our beloved Gillian Tamaki.
Yeah, she's great.
Which is not the same style as Kai Nielsen, but yeah. Why do you like her?
Yeah, she is more of an artist whose personal style is something that I am trying to not quite emulate, but achieve myself. She can communicate so much with very few lines, and she does detail very well as well. But she can just do these really simple characters, and I don't know, her sense of humor is also very good. Like her and her cousin Mariko work on a lot of these books together, and the two of them together just create wonderful stories. And I love the way that she draws things.
Have you ever collaborated with a writer?
I have. When I was first starting out, I would do a lot of short comics for Kaboom books, which were comics based off of cartoons. So it was like Adventure Time, Bravest Warriors, Steven Universe. All of these comic books would have little short mini comics at the end of an issue, and they would be by sort of up and coming artists. And I got hired to do quite a few of those, and a lot of the times I would write and draw the story, but a few times I got a script and did the art for those. But those were always less than 6 pages.
Okay.
So I've never really had a working relationship with another writer. And at this point, I would be nervous too, because I know how I work by myself so well. I would be nervous that I wouldn't like get along with the writer's sensibilities or something. But I'm open to it. I just haven't ever done a long project with another writer.
Yeah, I like to ask this question again and again because it's in France, for example, it's so natural. They often work together and have. And one of the effects, I guess, is that, or I will say, is that they have more output, that they are faster in doing a whole story, a whole graphic novel, a whole comic. And yeah, it's quite interesting. And in Germany, it's not common. There are only very few people who work with a script, with a given script from somebody else. I don't know what the reason is and what people prefer. That's the reason I ask, and I find this is a very good answer. Maybe we should talk a little bit about Lumberjanes. Unfortunately, I only got this copy. While I'm prepared, I'm waiting for another one. Maybe you can tell us about the concept of this magazine, which does not exist anymore.
Well, the story's done, but the books are still out there. Lumberjanes is, I'm not one of the original creators of Lumberjanes, but it was a series that I started writing for when one of the creators, N.D. Stevenson, left the book. It is an all-ages series about this group of girls who go to summer camp in the woods where they encounter strange creatures and monsters, and it's about their supernatural adventures that they go on and their friendship. And it's a lot of fun.
And this was a whole different setting to what you've done before and after that, because you're working in a team and you're doing, if I get it right, mostly the covers of the magazines, of the compilations, or?
Yeah, I was the co-writer for it, and also I did covers. So I didn't do the interior art or the lettering. So for that series, I would turn in a script for a 22-page issue once a month. And I did that for a few years, until the end of the series.
You only write it? Okay, that's interesting. And when it comes to the cover, what's important for you for a good cover?
So since I knew what the story was about, when I was working on the covers, I would try to incorporate some aspect of the story, and I would do a bunch of thumbnails, tiny little rough sketches of my ideas, and send those to my editor, and they would respond with the cover that they liked, and then I would bring that sketch to final art and send it in.
And you like that job? You like doing covers?
Yeah, it's illustration. I love illustration.
But what's the difference between doing a cover and doing the stories in the artistic or,
you're communicating with just one visual, and you're also trying to make that visual stand out on because at the comic book shop you have all of the monthly issues on a wall, and so you want your cover to stand out and be eye-catching.
So maybe we can do a little experiment before we talk about the cover of Snapdragon, because there were some interesting informations in the book. I told you about this kids comic magazine we're doing, I'm involved in, and we always had a big discussion about the covers, of course. And we ask always one artist to do the cover, although mostly there is no connection to the stories inside. sometimes even there is no story from the person who did the cover inside. And we have this big discussion what a comic magazine for kids need on the cover. If you were asked, you now describe the scene of the bookshop. Which is the cover you would pick up first, and why? Why is the most interesting?
The ones that jump out to me are these two.
These two?
I know that when I was a kid, I would look for illustrations that I could stare at for a while, and ones that I felt told a bit of a story. Like this one really jumps out to me because this character seems very interesting, and there's a lot of little creatures and eyeballs to look at, and I like the color scheme of it. This one really seems to be telling a story, and there are, again, lots of little details that you can look at. It feels like there's little secrets on the page that if you just look at it long enough, you'll learn more about what's going on. So, I mean, this one also stands out because of similar reasons. But, yeah.
So it's important for you that you get catched by it, and there's a certain amount of details. If I understand it right.
Exactly.
Okay, so I don't know if this cover was your choice, but at least you give us in at the last pages our own choice. There is this cover gallery. So maybe you can tell us something about the discussion. I know that the publishers, it's the first thing they need because for the catalogs, and they announce it with these covers. What was the discussion, and how did what was the story of the decision, and are you happy with that?
I am happy with the cover that we went with for this story.
And it's the same in the German version and the English version. That's not always the case. Yeah. Okay.
This was the first one that I came up with when the story was called Roadkill Witch. That was the title I had for the pitch, and I had that title right up until the end, as you can see, when I started working on cover designs, and we went through a lot of rounds. These are the ones that sort of stand out the most to me, but there were probably like a couple more on top of all of these. What I really wanted to do was have a pretty simple color scheme, have a color and then its complement. So I had a lot of like blue and yellow, which aren't complementary colors, but I was kind of leaning into the purple and blue, and then I wanted something really bright that jumped out. So I really like the magenta color to make things pop on the page. So I was trying to keep the color scheme really simple. I was told that some of these looked too creepy, which is fair. I do love creepy illustrations.
Even the name Roadkill Witch is something else than Snapdragon.
It's a little spookier. You're not quite sure what's going on, and these were all a little too dark and mysterious. So I ended up going with the bigger, brighter color as opposed to just a little tiny pop of bright color. And we had the name changed to just Snapdragon, which I do like. And I tried to emphasize the sort of adventure and excitement aspect a little bit more in the later cover designs.
What I found interesting, I would say that the book is very it's a very good pace, and it's very fast or dynamic, I would say. Especially the opening, for example, is really something. And the cover is quite static. There is a lot to see. really a lot to see, and you will be happy to watch it over again and again after you read the book, because there is so many details in it, especially when it comes to the dog. But the choice was to make it a little bit static, or not to bring in some.
You know, at the end of the day, it was. I was taking the suggestions from the editors, because their job is to make a book stand out and look a certain way, and they have more knowledge about what's on bookshelves than I do. Their whole job is like looking at different books and thinking about how they look on a shelf. And so they picked this concept, and I agreed with them, and so I did this one. I had some more actiony, dynamic covers, but they were
it's
with
beautiful. And it displays also a bicycle, and you like to draw bicycle, and you like to drive bicycle, ride bicycles. Yeah. So maybe the last question, it's not super unique, but what are you working on right now? Is there another project, a new project, a new comic?
The comic that I'm working on right now is called Spoke, and it is a post-apocalyptic story about a bicycle messenger.
Again, the bicycle.
I really like bicycles. I'm trying to make my interests converge. So I've been wanting to do a story about bicycles for a while, and I finally felt inspired during the pandemic to do a post-apocalyptic story where things are going pretty well.
Okay.
It's not a sad story.
And it's a good choice when it comes to transport, to have a bike, I guess, in post-apocalyptic scenes.
Yeah, they don't have cars or airplanes, so you have a bicycle.
And does it take place in a town, or again on the countryside?
Everything's kind of the countryside in the story.
After all,
there aren't really cities anymore, but yeah, it's rural. I really wanted to draw the wilderness with sort of very little human impact. It's kind of a self-indulgent story, because I get to draw all these things that I enjoy looking at and thinking about.
Great. And when can we read it?
It's not done yet.
Okay.
So eventually.
Eventually.
Yes.
But you know the storyline, and you know the tone, and you know the characters, and already know. Yeah. It's funny because Greg Thompson, for example, he did a kids science fiction comic in space, and it's so countryside. It's all these spaceships are tractors and stuff. It's really rural, rural science fiction stuff. So it's always comes to the surface that he grows up also, I guess, in Minnesota, on a farm, and yes.
You write what you know.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. And the last question, maybe we never asked it before. Somebody, what was the last great comic you read and can recommend? Can also be a very old one. It's
a good question. It's always hard to pick. I think the most recent comic that I completely devoured was Dungeon Meshi. It's a manga. The English title is Delicious in Dungeon, and it is, if you like Dungeons and Dragons.
And it's from Japan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the artist is also the writer, and she includes a lot of her concept work in some of the like end of the book. She'll include some of the concept work, and she does some of the best character design work I've ever seen.
Mhm.
I love looking at her art and looking at her sketches, and the story is also very good. The characters are great, and it's completed now, so you can read the whole thing. And
It's a series. So,
Yeah.
And what is her name?
Ryoko Kui.
Mhm.
Sorry, I want to make sure that I have her name right.
Yeah, that's important because
Really
I'm
good.
sure I will check that and explore that. Yeah. So we can end with a real good hint.
Yes,
I'm
it
sure.
is Ryoko
Ryoko
Kui.
Kui. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Never heard it before, but
She does great stuff, and she has good autism representation.
Mhm.
She did another shorter comic that I don't remember the name of right now, but the main character has autism, and you see a lot of his internal workings when he's having conversations with
Mhm.
people. He's thinking about all of these all of these things to help him get through the conversation because he has a hard time talking with people,
Mhm.
and she does that representation very well.
Oh,
I
that's
think.
good. That
Yeah.
sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems that when it comes to autism, comics are a proper way to deal with that.
Yeah.
To give at least a hint how it maybe could feel to be in
Yeah.
the spectrum. So
And for some people, comics are a lot easier to read than prose,
Yeah.
which I also think is really cool.
yeah. So thank you so much for your answers. It was
Thank you.
very I enjoyed very much, and hope that the technique works. This was a mess. Anyway, we can put in the images later, and yeah. So if you see that, I guess I must say you subscribe it. Should subscribe it, yeah. And yeah, thank you for giving us all this great information and
My
your
pleasure.
company. And have a good time in Germany.
I already have been having a great time.